Tracking the energy use of your smart home isn't just about knowing the cost, it can also highlight potential problems. Yes, smart plugs can help, but buying one for every device gets expensive. So in this video, I'll show you a smarter way to monitor power consumption in Home Assistant, even for devices that don't report it themselves. Hey everyone, my name's Simon and welcome to Byte of Geek, a channel that's all about Home Assistant and smart home technology. So if you're like me and you're slowly building up your Home Assistant energy dashboard, then you may well be at a point where you've bought a few smart plugs and you've got a few devices added in, and that's great, but you've still got all of this untracked usage showing in your energy graphs, and you've got absolutely no idea what's using all of this electricity. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can build out your Home Assistant energy dashboard for devices in your smart home that don't provide power monitoring information, and hopefully help you understand where and what devices are costing you money in your home. By generating the data for devices that don't automatically provide it, over time you should start to close the gap on the untracked usage in the energy dashboard and effectively eliminate the grey bar. So when you're in your energy dashboard, which if you didn't know you can get to via settings and dashboards, and there you'll find your energy dashboard. And if you look at the top of the screen, you'll see there is an energy option. And when you click on this and then scroll down a little bit, you'll see your individual devices listed there. Now, when I started building up this area of my energy dashboard, I basically bought some energy monitoring smart plugs, which were a mix of Zigbee and Matter over Wi-Fi devices. And I looked at the main devices around the house that I wanted to track consumption for and just log those into Home Assistant. These would be things like my NAS, my network switch, my Home Assistant mini PC, and so on. And I think this is the route that most people would probably go. However, I've now changed this approach a little bit, mainly because you just can't keep spending a ton of money on smart plugs, and in some cases they don't look great anyway when they're on display, but also because you can be smarter about how you capture this information. So what I've done is looked at devices around the house that have what I would call variable consumption, and by that, well, if you take this room for example that I'm sat in at the moment, my NAS will idle at 55 watts. However, when it's running at 100%, then it consumes at 90 watts. Another example would be my PC that I've got under my desk. And whilst I'm editing my video scripts, then it'll use a lot less power than for when it's rendering one of the videos. And for this kind of device, it's better to have a smart plug attached to them to capture the consumption information. These aren't devices that I can just go to the spec sheet for and pull out the general power consumption, because they're so variable depending on how they're being used during the day. All of these devices, my network switch, my router, my mini PC, my 3D printer, they're all monitored via a smart plug to give me accurate power consumption data. However, as great as this is, that's not what this video is about. This video is about those devices we have in Home Assistant that we're not tracking via smart plugs. Those devices that Home Assistant knows about their state but doesn't have the power information. As we add more devices to our smart homes, it's easy to forget that with some of these devices we just can't measure the consumption, and that's what we're looking at in this video. How do we get an idea of how much power these devices are consuming when they're either idle or powered on? Of course, without something like a smart plug, we can only really estimate the power consumption of these devices. It won't be exact because there might be other attributes of the device that Home Assistant doesn't know about that affects how much power is required. However, that aside, this is certainly better than not knowing anything about those devices at all. Now, I know some people turn devices completely off overnight to cut down on the standby power that's consumed by their devices, but for those of you who don't do this, then it's another great benefit of going down this route. If you're in the habit of leaving things in standby or sleeping your computers, then these are contributing to that untracked usage. And the more devices you have, the more you're wasting electricity and money. So now you'll be able to see clearly what devices are using the most when they're in standby and decide whether you shouldn't be turning them off instead, or perhaps even replacing a device with something that's more efficient. And by using the tools provided by Home Assistant, such as the energy flow, you'll be able to see just how much energy is being consumed by different parts of your house. And I think that's a pretty cool thing to be able to look at. And if you do as well, and you're finding this video useful, then why not hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my next smart home video. So you might be thinking, this is great. And well, you'd be right. You can gather a lot of information about how your smart home consumes energy via this route. However, it's not going to work for everything. And there's two categories of devices that it won't work for. First off, we have the devices that have that variable power consumption based on their usage, just like those I mentioned earlier. And secondly, it won't work for devices that you haven't got in Home Assistant. So things like a toaster or a hairdryer, or even something like a kettle, unless it's a smart one. Unless devices are connected to Home Assistant in some way, then you're not going to be able to track the information for them. Everything else, however, should be possible. So what we're going to do is to use an integration called PowerCalc, which we'll use to help estimate the power consumption of a range of devices. And to install this, we're going to need to use HACS. Now, if you haven't got HACS installed, then I've got a great step-by-step video on the channel that shows you how to install this. And I'll put a link for that down below in the description of this video. With HACS installed, then we just go over to that, and in the search at the top, we type in PowerCalc, and you should have it come up in the results. Click on it, and you should then have the details displayed. So just go ahead and click on the download button in the bottom right corner. We just want the latest version, so click on download again. Now, once that's downloaded, we just need to restart Home Assistant so that the integration becomes activated. So we'll just go ahead and do that now. And then we need to head on into settings and integrations and click on the add integration button in the bottom right corner. Search for PowerCalc and add that to Home Assistant. Once you've done that, then you can go ahead and set up the global configuration, and you can pretty much leave all of these as the default. The guide on the website has lots of information as to what these are all about. But to be honest with you, leaving everything as is will likely be fine for most people. However, if you want to do anything slightly more advanced, then you can configure all of these in these screens. Now, if you don't want to set up and configure PowerCalc through the UI, then you can just edit your configuration YAML file and add PowerCalc as close to the top of the file as possible, really. The online help is full of examples and configuration options should you want to go down this route, but I'm going to use the UI for this video. Now, I generally reboot my Home Assistant once I've installed an integration. So when you've done that, go into settings and integrations, and you'll likely see that PowerCalc has already found devices that it recognizes and that you can now set up. For me, it's found smart plugs and a whole bunch of IKEA bulbs. So I'm just going to add those into Home Assistant now. Then when I go into my energy dashboard, I can now add those new devices to the list of individual devices, and gradually I'll be closing the gap on the untracked consumption. PowerCalc supports many different categories of devices from a large list of manufacturers. In fact, if I just take a quick look here at the library on the website, you can see that we've got IKEA, Govee, Tuya, TP-Link, etc. The list is quite extensive, and for your typical smart devices, that should cover a large number of them. And if your device is listed here, then it means it'll be supported by default and will automatically create the required entities for you. As an example, if we just go into settings and entities and pick one of my smart plugs, the air freshener in the kitchen, for example, and as you can see, PowerCalc has created new entities for this that is now tracking the consumption of the plug. Now, even though there are quite a few standard supported devices listed in the database, we're not actually restricted to just setting up those. In fact, there are some devices in my Home Assistant setup that haven't been detected, like my smart TV and soundbar, for example. However, it's quite an easy thing to get them set up. I'm going to go through setting up some of those additional devices now. However, what I'm entering here is specific to the device models that I have, which if you have the same, then you can just copy these values. But if you're using different devices, then you'll need to define the values yourself. If I go back into settings and integrations and scroll down to PowerCalc and click on that, and at the top I can click on the add entry button to create a new item. So I now want to add my Samsung Smart TV, which I have set up in Home Assistant. And as you can see here, I have an option to set up another instance of PowerCalc. If I click on that, then I have several options for my sensor type. I'm going to select the manual virtual power sensor. And first I need to select the entity that I want to add. So this will be the television. And then I just need to give it a name. You then have different options for the calculation strategy. I'm leaving it as fixed, but each of these options is worth reading up about in the documentation, as you may need to use something like linear if you're going to set up a fan in Home Assistant, for example. Next, I need to input my standby power for this device. Now, I know this is 0.5 watts, but if you're unsure about any of the power values, then most of this information will be either on a sticker on the device, in the user manual, or generally available online. I then need to enter how much power the TV uses when it's on. And remember, this isn't going to be 100% accurate unless we're using power monitoring plugs, but it's probably the closest you're going to get to the consumption without using them. So for this, I'm just going to Google my TV model. And as you can see, this has a typical consumption of 70 watts. So I'm going to enter that figure in here. As you can see on the next screen, this is for advanced configurations for situations like when there's a device that becomes unavailable and so on. But for now, I'm going to leave all of this as it is and save that. And going back into the energy dashboard, I can now add that in as a device to monitor its consumption. Next, I'm going to add in my Samsung soundbar, as that's also available in Home Assistant. So I'll go through the same process and I'll add a new entry in the PowerCalc integration and choose to set up a manual virtual power sensor, choosing the soundbar as the entity, giving it a name. The standby power is 0.5 watts and it consumes 31 watts when it's turned on. And just like it was with the TV, I can also add this soundbar to the energy dashboard. So as you can see, it's straightforward to add devices in to start monitoring their consumption. But for some devices, such as fans or purifiers that may have variable speed settings, you might need to invest into something like a power meter, which are pretty cheap. I got this one from Amazon for about £12, and you can plug your device into this and then play around with the different speed settings to see how much power is being consumed, and then you can set up the sensor to match that. You can even determine how much power something is consuming when it's charging. As an example here on the PowerCalc website, in the documentation, if you have a robot vacuum and it exposes its battery level, then you can set up a sensor to determine when the vacuum is docked, how much power it's likely to be drawing based on what the percentage the battery is at. It's all pretty cool stuff, and it makes it genuinely possible now to be able to track energy usage across your devices. So that's it. A nice way for you to use Home Assistant to calculate the power consumption of your devices in your smart home that don't have power monitoring information. And hopefully now you can start building out your energy dashboard and seeing where all your money is going. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss more smart home content like this. But as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.